You know, the difference between a sponge and a sift is that a sponge soaks up everything. But when you put something in a sift or in a drainer or strainer, you keep that which is good and you let go that which is bad. So when I came into this way of life at age 14, being so young and being a sponge in mind, I soaked up everything that my teachers said and without challenging them. And that's bad because there's no teaching that should go unchallenged. And when I mean unchallenged, I don't mean disrespectful. I don't mean being rude, but I mean when someone presents information and says that this is the truth, they have to have the ability to first demonstrate it, and you must validate it. It's a two-way street. They have to demonstrate how it's true, and then you have to go out and secularly validate it. Mm-hmm. When you go to a jeweler to purchase a wedding band and you make the purchase, we all know it's intelligent that you must get an appraisal. Why don't we employ that same way of thinking with the gems which come into our mind? If the gems that we put on our hands require an appraisal for validation, what about the gems that come into our minds? Having said that, when I reached about age 19 and 20, I began to challenge some of the things that I learned from my teachers. And I'm glad that I did, because it was that day that I became what my father told me a real scholar is, a free thinker. My mind was free. You are a prisoner, a slave, and a captive to someone's opinions until you validate it as being true. And it's when I began to release the bondage and the chains of captivity, mental captivity, to become a free thinker and challenge everything I was taught. And by the way, I still practice that same concept. Everything that comes into my sphere, I challenge the information before I accept it as true. So after challenging the information, the community that I came from rejected the New Testament entirely, even to the extent that they said that Jesus, whom we call Yeshua, didn't even exist. One of my teachers, if I can quote him verbatim, he said he's as fake as Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. So you have to imagine, coming from a school of thought that taught so hard against the New Testament, yes, I never challenged it for many years, but it was when I began to challenge information and I began to research, there was some very, very tough things that I found. And here's the first thing that I found, my brother. In my community, which rejects the narrative of Jesus as being a historical person, I found out through research, you could do a better job of proving that Jesus walked the earth than you could do proving Abraham walked the earth. Are you hearing me? That doesn't mean Abraham is not historical. But what I'm saying is Jesus is more written about contemporary with his era than anyone throughout history. That would be the last person that you want to challenge as being historical. There's far too much contemporary evidence that validates his historical walk. So that was the first position that I changed.
Okay.
Okay. And then I began to wrestle with whether or not the narratives which are said of him are true. And the more I penetrated the Gospels, which is where he speaks, the more I said, wait, this is not the docile, turn the other cheek guy that my temple and congregation painted him as. He was a warrior. When there were wicked among us and they were doing wickedness in the temple, he made a belt out of spikes, went in there, overturned the tables, and whipped the money changers. This wasn't the turn the other cheek guy that I was always told. This was a warrior. This was a revolutionary. This was someone who got some newfound respect from me. Then I began to study his teachings. And I said, but wait a hot minute. Because he sounds like several of the rabbis in the oral tradition. And that's hard for some people to wrestle because not everyone knows what the contents of the oral tradition reveal or teach. But when you know the oral tradition and you listen to the teachings of Jesus, you would know that in every instance where he was challenged for not keeping the law, it's because of the fact that the people challenging haven't fully grasped the law that they're critiquing him about. This man was a master of Torah exposition, so much so that his explanations literally went over the heads of many of the people of his generation. Remember, when he's introduced in the text of the New Testament, he gets up and he teaches on the Sabbath. And it says all the rabbis and scholars and scribes marveled at the things that left his mouth. So clearly he taught and revealed things that no scholar contemporary with him could understand. He was a child prodigy. He had a powerful mind. His discernment of Torah was so impactful that to this day, he is used as the marker for that which is righteousness throughout the world, as so many people have taken on to his teachings. Having said that, my brother, the awakening that I have experienced in embracing his historicity has caused me to grow fond of not just the character, but of the morality and the scholarly mind, the masterful mind that he possessed. And that surmises some of my views. I want to say more, but I'm going to hold back because I'm actually going to be releasing a book on him soon, which is entitled The Messiah Codex. So okay. I unfortunately must hold back, but I just want to say I literally could say so much more.
But what is it? What else do you feel that the Christian community is missing, that if they only, took heed to this would make a big difference within their life?
So one thing that the Christian community is definitely missing, and I think I can even to an extent say a greater part of the Israelite community is also missing, is tying in the written text with the oral tradition. It's so very important to understand that before something is committed to writing, it's first transmitted via oral tradition. So even the book of Chronicles, we say Chronicles in English. But if we read Hebrew, you'd realize it's literally saying oral tradition.
Wow.
The word for Chronicles in biblical Hebrew is Divrei Yamim, which stands for ancient words or words of the days, meaning that which was recorded in the book of Chronicles stems from the oral traditions which were orally passed down, the words. That's why you find extra history in Chronicles that you don't find anywhere in the book of Kings, because oral tradition always provides more information than any literary text. This is why when we read in the Bible, and if you want more information on this particular story, go into the book of Jasher. If the Bible was written with the aim and purpose of being a history book, it would not send you outside. It would not outsource you for information. Everything would be right here. You see, the Bible, while it contains history, and in fact, it contains the most accurate history upon the face of the world, its aim is to be a moral guide which uses various historical occurrences to teach about morality. We have it twisted. We think the Bible is a history book because there's so much accurate history there. And there's some truth to it, because the Bible is actually used on many archaeological sites and digs for several centuries now. However, the aim of the book is not to be a history book, because if that's the case, you would find dates. If that's the case, you would find far more details. So the aim of the book is to take these histories which have occurred and it is to use them as a moral guide. The Bible is not something which once occurred. The Bible is not or should not be relegated simply as history, us looking back at something that once occurred. The Bible is a moral guide. So every time you look at it, it's speaking something to you today. And if we're reading it any other way, we're missing the point.
Your tours within the museums. If we don't connect the Bible to that part of the history, then we're missing so much. Why is that important, and why do you do the tours?
So the museum tours for me started about 3 years ago. I visited museums, several decades ago, but to actually conduct a tour is a different experience, a different beast entirely. And one thing I realize in the Israelite community that's lacking is our ability to marry the historical record with the biblical narratives. It's good to know the Bible, to even be able to quote it, and better yet, to actually live it. However, if you don't know how to look into the secular historical record to see where the biblical narrative is validated as being historical, we are in trouble. Because the same people who speak of the Bible as history, they tend to do a horrible job showing the historicity of it. So if I say Moses, you should automatically know what century we're talking about. If I say the Exodus, and I'm speaking to someone who is a scholar or student of the Bible, you should be able to tell me the date of the Exodus. These things have to be known if we're going to speak about the Bible as history. I mean, if you just regard it as a religious or spiritual text void of history, then sure, do as you please. But the moment you say it's history, there's things that go along with validating it as history. So the museum tours began 3 years ago for me, where I went to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and I first went as an observer. I joined tours and I observe what's going on. I'm the person that I'll watch until I get it myself. So I attended several tours. I walked the length of the museum at this point, well over 1,000 times. I've been to the Metropolitan Museum in particular well over 1,000 times, to the point where when they see me, they know me by first name. The thing that drove me to do this is I wanted to arm our community with the ability to be tangible with the evidences which validate the biblical narrative as history. And so far, it's been amazing, brother. I have people that flew from California to be included in my museum tours here in New York City. People that literally got on a flight for 4 to 5 hours to do a museum tour, which lasted 2 to 3 hours, and went home either that same day or the next day. Now, I don't know about them, but if I go to a nice major city, I need to stay at least 7 days. But I appreciate it. And it shows me that those people are hungry. Our people are hungry. Our people are no longer content with the status quo. The ill-treated information, the misinformation, the misappropriated information. Our people are hungry for right knowledge, true knowledge. Our people are hungry for truth. And if you call yourself a scholar, you are a shepherd. Let's feed the people the truth. We have a responsibility to do such.
Can you recall any moments of finding something in those museums or just through your studies? Because I know recently you just bought the Mernete stele, right? So you invested, you bought that, you put money to that. You know what I'm saying? Like, how important was that?
So yeah, in the last 2 years, I've been acquiring a number of artifacts that are coming from all parts of the world. I have artifacts that are being sent to me directly from Ghana and Nigeria. I have artifacts that are coming directly from Israel. I have artifacts that are coming directly from Babylon or Mesopotamia. And of course, I've had several sent to me directly from Cairo, from Egypt. This is all part of, putting together those evidences that are necessary to conduct these tours. One of the things that blew my mind away to see in the museum was one day about maybe 4 years ago, before I started doing the tours, there was a label in the museum that said early Hebrews. But when I looked at the depiction of who the early Hebrews were, I immediately had to do this in a animated way. because maybe I'm not seeing clearly. Because these men were darker than me. This is a picture that the Metropolitan Museum of Art has, a painting of what's described as the early Hyksos and the early Amu Asiatics coming into ancient Kemet or Egypt as slaves and as men bearing tribute. The irony of that is exactly how the biblical narrative describes how we entered Egypt. Joseph comes by himself as a slave. Later on, his brothers come bearing goods. So when you look at this painting, which is referred to as the Khnum Hotep II tomb scenery, this is where the painting was found. The painting was found in what's called the Beni Hassani tomb of Khnum Hotep II, who's a Nisut or a king which once reigned in Egypt during the Middle Kingdom period. And it's during this period that you, for the first time, begin to see a strong pictorial representation of what the early Hebrews look like. So here we are using, Exodus to say, look, when God performs a miracle in showing and declaring to Pharaoh the power and might of the God of Moses, he says to Moses, take your hand and put it in your bosom. And then when you return, it shall be white as snow. And us as Israelites, we remind everyone throughout the world that the miracle in this act is not in white skin turning whiter. The miracle in this act would obviously have been in dark skin turning white. That's the miracle, right? So having said that, watching this painting, I immediately said to myself, we are arguing tooth and nail with people, getting them to understand and conceive that there are several places in the Bible which can spell out for you that the original people of the Bible are dark or are black. But if we go to Egypt, they got pictures of how we looked. So that blew my mind away, brother, because we can argue about a text. We can argue about translations. But how are you going to argue about somebody's choice to use brown and black to depict the color of the Hebrews, especially when you know they had white paint?
Hey, boy, you tough with it, man.